If you haven't guessed by now looking at it, this is a thoroughly amateur production on the Whiskey for Beginners channel. How well that came out, I don't know. Of all the things I'm going to worry about, that ain't one of them. What I want to do today, by the way, I'm Robert McKay. I'm the sole owner and proprietor and thoroughly amateur talker on the Whiskey for Beginners channel. What I want to talk about today is this question: what is aging whiskey? We talk about the age of a whiskey. Is it 20 years old? Is it 30 years old? My thoroughly amateur production means I'm adjusting things even as I talk, trying to get the camera and the lights and everything right. And they're never going to be really right. Thoroughly amateur. But what does it mean to age whiskey? If you're brand new to whiskey, you might not know. When I first started drinking whiskey back in September of 2021, and you'll have to excuse me, allergies. They've been behaving most of the day, but apparently they decided not to. When I first started drinking whiskey, I knew nothing about it. And so I understand what it might be like from your perspective. Maybe you know this. Okay, not a problem. You're free to move on. But maybe you don't. And had a couple of glasses ringing together over here because I've been doing some review videos also. And I can't remember where I was or even what sentence I was in, so let's just go on with it. Whiskey, or any distilled spirit, when it comes off of the still, is absolutely clear. It seems to me that it's even clearer than water. And it also, by the way, before I go on, it already has flavor unless they've distilled it to such a high proof all the flavors out of it. And then it's vodka. Y'all can have vodka. But assuming that it's coming off the still at a decent proof, and American whiskey by law has to be 160 proof or less off the still, except for a category called light whiskey, which is almost vodka, and which is, I wouldn't even know where to find a light whiskey. But it comes off the still at whatever proof, and it has the flavors of the grain in it. If you ever want to get some idea of what that's like, you can try Buffalo Trace White Dog. I've had the mash bill #1. It's not very complex. It only has like 2 or 3 flavors in it. But the flavors are very much there because of the grain that they distilled it from. Aging will give it more flavor and will give it color. Now, how do they do that? By law, American rye whiskey, corn whiskey, and bourbon whiskey have to age. Now, how long is not a specification. There's what they call 10-second bourbon. You can put it in a barrel, turn right around and dump the barrel. It's been in the barrel. Legally, it's bourbon. If it doesn't go into a barrel, then legally it's not bourbon. But typically, it'll be in the barrel for 2, 4, 6, 8, however many years. There are 23-year-old bourbons out there, and probably much longer than that in the barrel is going to put too much oak into it. But you've got this charred barrel. Speaking of bourbon now, they take the barrel, they char it. The fire just chars the inside of the barrel, and then the whiskey goes in there, and over time, as heat and cold expand and contract the liquid, it goes in and out of the wood. It picks up color from the wood. It picks up flavor from the wood. And so a whiskey, which right off the still might have had 3 notes to the nose and 3 notes to the taste, will wind up having 6 or 8 notes on the nose, 6 or 8 notes on the tongue. And not only that, but it will pick up color. One of the ways we can try to pinpoint when they first started selling aged whiskey in the United States as a routine thing is by when they start talking about red whiskey. George Washington, after he left the presidency, became the largest whiskey distiller in the United States for a short while before he died. But the whiskey he turned out was what we would call white dog, the unaged white or clear rye whiskey off the still. And then, probably purely by accident, no matter what anybody tells you, nobody knows who invented bourbon. Nobody knows who first aged whiskey in a barrel on purpose. But they transport whiskey in barrels and crackers and fish and all manner of things because a barrel can hold a lot and it's easy to transport. You can roll it, you see. And whiskey transported in barrels from the whiskey producing regions up in Kentucky and Tennessee, going down the Ohio River and the Mississippi River. As it traveled, it was going in and out of the wood of those barrels and picking up color and flavor. And so people eventually wanted the red whiskey because it tasted better. And that's essentially all aging is. Taking a barrel, charred or uncharred, depending on what you're doing. Corn whiskey must use, by law, either new uncharred barrels or used charred barrels. Scotch and Irish whiskey will use some new barrels, some used bourbon barrels, some used sherry barrels. They use a whole variety of barrels and blend it all together to get their specific taste. Rye whiskey has to use the new charred barrels in the United States. But whatever barrel you're using, however long the whiskey's in there, it's moving in and out of the wood, picking up color and picking up flavor. And the longer it's in there, the more color and the more flavor it acquires. Talking is thirsty work. Just ask a preacher. I are one, I know. And there go the allergies again. That's what aging whiskey is. Now, when you get a bottle of whiskey, it may or may not have an age statement on it. In fact, I'm going to pull one out of my desk here. That's the only place I have that will work for storing whiskey. This is Balcones Texas Pot Still Bourbon. And on the back, I'm not even going to try to show you with my primitive facilities. It says aged at least 24 months in oak. We have here Knob Creek 9. Let me turn it so you can see the 9. This is whiskey, and that 9 is how long it aged. The Balcones aged at least 24 months, 2 years. This is aged 9 years. And the colors, I don't know if you noticed it, and I'm not going to pull them back out for a comparison, but their colors are more or less alike. The Balcones may be a tad bit darker. But that's the difference in climate. You take the same juice, as the barrel's the same as you can get, and they're never exactly alike. Put one in Texas, one in Kentucky, one in Scotland, and in 3 years, the Texas whiskey will be dark and flavorful. In 3 years in Kentucky, it will just be getting started on being good whiskey. In Scotland, it's barely in the barrel. It's going to take, maybe 6, 8, 10 more years before it's ready to dump and drink. Climate makes a difference. Another thing about aging whiskey, let me pull that Knob Creek bourbon back out. 9 years. Not all the whiskey in here is going to be 9 years old. It will be at least 9 years, all of it. The age statement on a bottle of whiskey, and this is true not just in the United States, but Scotland and Ireland as well, and probably all whiskey producing countries. The age statement is the age of the youngest barrel that went into that batch of whiskey, that went into that bottle. So if you see 9-year-old whiskey, the youngest whiskey in that bottle is 9, but in that batch they might have had 9-year-old barrels, they might have had 12-year-old barrels, they might have had an 18-year-old barrel. On the Balcones, you remember, it was at least 2 years old. Well, there might have been nothing in there that was just 2. Everything might have been 3 years old, or there might have been a 4-year-old barrel. It's the youngest whiskey in the batch that they've bottled. And they do it by batches because you can't just dump every barrel in the warehouse at once. For the one thing, they're not all ready at the same time. But they dump a batch of whiskey. And for a small distiller, a full batch might be 10 barrels. For a big distiller like Jim Beam, which produces the Knob Creek, they might be dumping 1,000 barrels in a batch. And by the way, this is a side note, that means the term small batch is meaningless. A small batch for one distillery might be 2 barrels. A small batch for another distillery might be 200 barrels. It's a meaningless term. It's a sales term. And one hopes that the distilleries are indeed using smaller batches for their small batch whiskey than they normally do, but you don't know. And they're not putting it on the bottle. There might be distillers here and there which say the batch size is such and so. I've not seen it. But anyway, they're dumping this batch of whiskey. Say it's Knob Creek. All the barrels will be at least 9 years old. But of all those barrels, some might be 10, some might be 11, some might be 12, some might be 20. Probably not, but it could be. That is pretty much the basics on aging whiskey. I don't think there's anything else I need to cover, so y'all have a good day. Enjoy some whiskey.